All right, hello class. How's everybody doing? We're going to introduce a new lesson this week. We're going to introduce the civil rights movement. Okay, we're going to talk about it now because I want to give you a chance to watch it because we're going to talk about the origins of the rights movement. Where did it all begin? Every big movement had to begin somewhere. We could look at current events today. We look at a big movement such as England leaving the European Union. That's a big movement, but what caused them to leave? That had to start from somewhere where the people had to get fed up that they didn't want to be part of the union anymore. And this is similar when we talk about the civil rights movement. Okay, a lot of people got fed up with the inequality that was going on in the United States. So we started this big movement. So when we introduced the lesson, we're going to talk about the origins, which we're going to talk about today. So you'll have a kind of a basic understanding of when we really get into the nooks and crannies of it in the next coming weeks in class. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the big case that really started all off was Brown versus Board of Education. Okay, that was a case that struck down the separate but equal clause. And to refresh your memories, I know we already talked about this, but I want to refresh your memories on what separate but equal was. It was a case known as Plessy versus Ferguson that said there could be separate accommodations for blacks and for whites as long as they were equal. But we know in reality, it was separate, but it was never always equal. And we talk about we separate a lot of accommodations such as restaurants or whatever, but the big thing came into public schools. Okay, public schools were segregated. We had white schools and we had schools for blacks only or for African Americans. So what separate but equal said this was allowed. But when the Brown versus Board of Education case went to the Supreme Court, it said that separate but equal was unconstitutional. So let me explain how the Brown versus Board of Education got started. It involved a young girl named Linda Brown. Linda Brown lived she was an African-American girl. She lived about 5 blocks away from a school, which was an all-white school. She obviously wasn't allowed to attend. This was 1950s when this was going on. So she had to walk past that school, catch a bus to go another 20 blocks down the road to an all-black school, which, according to Plessy versus Ferguson, was supposed to be equal. But like I said, in reality, it was not. All right, her school was falling apart. The teachers weren't really trained or well prepared. The books were old. A lot of times they would get their books from white schools after they got outdated. They would give the books to the black schools. So a lot of them were outdated. And this didn't really work out. So they took this case to the Supreme Court. And this is why it's known as Brown versus Board of Education. And this is from Topeka, Kansas. Okay, and this went in front of the Supreme Court. And the Browns were represented by the NAACP. And if you don't remember, the NAACP stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That's what it stands for, the NAACP. Okay? And the NAACP was led by an attorney named Thurgood Marshall. And Thurgood Marshall, we're going to talk about later on too, he is a very prominent figure because he actually gets appointed to the Supreme Court and he becomes the first African American to do so. Okay? But right now, he is the lead attorney for the NAACP. And he's going to represent the Browns in the landmark Brown versus Board of Education case. And what the Supreme Court is going to rule that separate but equal is unconstitutional. Okay, it does violate the 14th Amendment that says all states shall grant all citizens the same rights. So they struck that down. They said, okay, you know what? Separate but equal is unconstitutional. Linda Brown has the right to go to any public school she wants to, even if one is 5 blocks away from her home. And that's what happened. So this was a huge case. And this is what really sparked the civil rights movement. Okay, because now the Supreme Court said, you know what, you cannot segregate anymore. You have to desegregate, and you have to allow people to go wherever they want. And the Supreme Court, which was led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, he said, you will do so, you will desegregate, and you will desegregate with all deliberate speed. And the reason he used that, all deliberate speed, is because he didn't want certain cities, certain towns, certain states to come up with new laws such as Jim Crow laws like we talked about before. He didn't want them to come up with that. He said, you will desegregate with all deliberate speed, you will do so right now, you will not think about it, you will just do it. Okay, and that's what he wanted to do. We wanted to end segregation, we wanted to unite everybody, kind of like go with the Constitution, what was said that we were going to do. So, and that's kind of how it got started right there. Now, when they desegregated the schools, I wish I could tell you that white students embraced African Americans coming to the school. The parents of the white students were happy about that they were coming to the school, but as you know, they were not. It was met with a lot of resistance. Okay, a lot of protests ended up coming up there afterwards. A lot of riots ended up sparking because of this. Okay, a lot of violence. Okay, a lot of people died. Lynchings came on the rise, especially in the 50s and 60s, as people fought to enforce civil rights and end desegregation and integrate a lot of the schools and pretty much integrate everything. And we're going to talk about a lot of things when we talk about Freedom Summer or Freedom Bus Rides. We're going to talk about all that in the next coming weeks. But this is kind of where the civil rights movement started. Okay, it started with Brown versus Board of Education. It started with the Supreme Court saying, you will desegregate right now. You will not come up with any more crazy laws. You will not hire a team of attorneys to challenge the Constitution. You will desegregate right now. And that kind of sparks the civil rights movement too. So that's the origins. And like I said, we're going to get way more in depth about it in the next couple of weeks, but I did just want to introduce this to you tonight. Now what I want you to do for the next class period is I want you to come up and find a prominent figure, somebody who was very significant during the civil rights movement. And what I want you to do is pick somebody from the 50s and 60s, okay? Because that's when most of the things happened during the civil rights movement. Now if you want to find somebody from the 70s, even 80s up to today, that's fine, but try to keep them in the 50s and 60s, because that's when a lot of the things happened during the civil rights movement. What you cannot do is do not pick Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or Rosa Parks. Those are obviously the two big ones. Okay, and we're going to talk way more in depth about them as we go through in the lesson. But just keep it, you know, somebody figure from the 50s and 60s. Don't pick MLK or Rosa Parks. So use those two. And just, you don't have to do any research. We're going to do the research in class on whoever you pick. Just have a name ready for the time, by the time the next class period starts. And what I also want you to think about also is when you pick your person who was very much involved in the civil rights movement, try not to just think about African American male. Obviously there was a lot of African American males involved, but try to think of maybe an African American woman. Try to think of whites. There were a lot of whites who joined the movement in the civil rights. Okay, so try to think of a lot about that too. So try to come up with different ideas and different people and bring that to class. And like I said, don't do the research. We're going to do the research on it as a class during our next class period. But just come up with somebody who was significant, who was very involved with the civil rights movement. Try to keep them in the 1950s and 60s. And if you come up with an African American male, that's fine. I mentioned a couple during this presentation. But if you come up with a female or a white person too, that would be good too. And if you want to think outside the box, if you want to think of somebody who challenged the civil rights movement, maybe certain southern governors from certain states who did not want to desegregate, we want to talk about him, you're more than welcome to do that too. So just kind of think of somebody else. All right? So anyway, I appreciate you watching. Have a good night, and I'll see you next class period.